The following is a conversation with Varun Dugirala, the co-founder of The Glitch, one of India's most creative agencies in the market right now. He's also the host of two very popular sought-after podcasts that you'll find in the description below. They're great podcasts, gives you great insight and just makes you feel better, feel productive, and I definitely think you should check it out. I've gained immense value out of it. I can personally vouch for it. We've spoken a lot about advertising, marketing, the creator space, the content economy, where it's headed. And so if you're somebody who is in this space, who wants to know about this space, I think the conversation is going to add immense value. Without further ado, I'll skip to the conversation and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Cheers. Varun, thanks so much for doing this, man. I've been a consumer of your content and I've been observing your stuff for quite some time now. So if finally, I'm very happy to do this.
Likewise, I'm happy we're finally doing this. I'm going to put this on public record that you've had to follow up way too many times with me to get this to happen. And apologize for the same, but I'm happy we're doing this.
No, all good. Varun, tell me something. So you hail from a family of doctors. You set your foot into engineering like half the country does. So all the odds were stacked against you to sort of enter a creative field and sort of, branch out from what society calls the norm. So was there like a moment of realization that, hold on, I think I have a creative flair and this is something that seems to be picking up in the country. So let me try and do this and let me put my foot into this.
So I had a few things going for me, right? My family is half doctors, half engineers.
Right.
All the doctors stayed in India, all the engineers went to the US, standard template. My parents are pretty chill in general. I remember even when I had that first chat with them, right? It was okay. Mostly doctors' kids become doctors. That chat happened. My dad was very clear that if I wasn't really going to be as committed as a doctor, I shouldn't do it, which I think is one of the best advices he gave me. But they generally told me to kind of figure what I wanted to do. And because I was not sure of what I wanted to, I had zero idea. All I did was sit and watch MTV and Channel V at that point of time. So they said, okay, at least get a 4-year degree. I think the logic was that do engineering because it will be a 4-year degree. After that, do whatever MBA, whatever you want to do in life, which is why engineering happened. I never actually thought of myself as a creative per se person. I just genuinely had spaces I wanted to work in. I wanted to work in the media space. I found it fascinating for many reasons. In my head, it was like, okay, one place I want to work in life was MTV. And I was like, how can I work in MTV? Study media. Maybe you can't be creative. So maybe you can work on the production side. Maybe you can do. So the access to information was much lower at that time. I mean, this is like very early internet days, right? You had .com and there was nothing much. We had like, I still remember modems. We had that modem with that dial-up tune coming in, right? So this is that time. So I think it was more access. Like I tried to figure out what you could do in this space and I couldn't figure out. So it was more about let's try and figure what those things are. And somewhere along the way, even me getting into media school was because my mom one day said, okay, 1 second, you're working in a slightly dead-end call center job. I found this application for this place called SIMC, which is Simbi's Mass Comm Institute. Maybe you should apply there. So in essence, I kind of jumped into it that way. I never actually, to be honest, considered myself creative till about 3 years ago, to be honest, because I've always done the logistical side. Even when I was like, creating shows for MTV and Channel V, I was a lot more logistical. Like, even if I had to direct something, I had a different way of directing than everybody else because I would have like, let's say, a 5-camera setup. I'd go to each cameraman, tell them what they had to kind of focus on. And I wouldn't really tell them what to do post that. I would literally almost say, because I'd give them directions as to what they can play within and let them do what they're doing. And I just look at the monitors and unless something was going really wrong, I would give no direction. Right? I was not a director per se. I was more like a conductor of sorts, if that's the term to use. But I think putting this pressure on myself, saying, okay, I want to do a creative profession was never there because I never considered what I was doing creative. I just had an area I enjoyed or I was enamored by, and okay, I want to work in that. What can you do in that? Is literally my only like focus. And I think that's how I've always progressed. Like even till date, I'll just find something interesting. Like what can I do within that? And then I figure what I can.
Right. So you jumped into it and then you took you made certain decisions. You mentioned that the media space was fascinating to you from the beginning. So, for example, for me, the so fascination sort of stems from the fact that something's amazing to you while it can be normal to others. And for me, even though nobody's listening, the idea that you can just plug in a cheap microphone onto a phone and then you can broadcast your stories to the world, that's fascinating to me. While it can be, yeah, this is quite normal to someone else, but I still do find this power of impacting or telling your stories to someone very. I just love it. What was
Yeah.
that point of fascination for you? I mean, even though you didn't have a clear-cut idea of the industry, there had to be something that sort of lured you into the whole thing, right?
So I've always been so here's how I looked at it. I would always consume a lot of content, whatever was accessible to me. I was that kid who, and this will make me sound really old. So in the late 80s, we would only have Doordarshan, this is pre-satellite television. And on every Sunday evening, you would have a few, like there's something called Top of the Pops that would play. We had like about 10 music videos from across the world.
Right.
I used to sit with the VHS tape and record those and play them on loop. Which for me was in a sense a music, which was MTV, right? Pre-MTV times. So I was always excited to say, okay, I want to work with music. I really was a person who enjoyed using music. I enjoyed what I saw on an MTV, for instance. Like, okay, and I was fascinated by it. What I was trying to figure out, and I've done that till date. Like, for instance, when I got into podcasting, I got into podcasting by mistake or rather by chance. I went to guest with somebody, Karthik from who did the Filter Coffee podcast, was his guest in his pilot, met the guys at IBM, and they said, okay, you sound fun, will you come and guest on another podcast? Guested on Simplified. And post that, I said, do you want to host a podcast? Let me try it out. But my tendency has always been, if I find something interesting, I try to consume as much information about it as possible. And that helps me make up my mind about what all do I want to do in it. And that's how I've always looked at things. Like, consume as much about it, filter it down, see which parts you enjoy. And so you kind of build your own hybridness to it, right? Like, I look at my journey as an entrepreneur. I enjoyed the logistics of having to set up an office, figuring out how to optimize space, how to look at, how to kind of be able to kind of crunch that money together. While I'd also enjoy how to kind of figure a way to get something done for a client in a budget which nobody else is agreeing to, right? So I would always pick like 10, 15 things I really enjoy, try to learn as much around it. I've been a person who references way too much in life. So for everything, I'll have there'll be a Pinterest board now or an Instagram saved folder, or there'll be a bunch of stuff, screenshots somewhere, but I'll always have stuff I can fall back on. So good, I want to do this. How do I do this? How did that person do it? Let me find out. So it's that. So, and that's actually, I found that to be, it's less pressure. Right. Because you're not claiming to say, I'm focusing on one thing. You are saying, I'm learning from people who are doing it, and maybe I'll figure it out as I go along.
Yeah, brilliant. There's so much to unpack there, but one thing that I wanted to touch upon is you spoke about how you entered the world of podcasting as a mistake, and it was all very coincidental. Now, one podcast has turned into two, and two is almost turning into a book now, which you're releasing next year. God knows what and all else you're up to.
There's another podcast coming, which I can't talk about, but it's coming. It's coming very, very soon. Before the end of the year, third podcast is coming up.
Great. So that's 3 podcasts now. And you also have your day job as an entrepreneur. How does this work? Like, have you set up systems in the week that sort of pedal you through? Okay, so Monday is podcast day, so I'm going to focus only on the podcast. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is for the day job. Can you talk about the systems that you sort of put in place to get the ship running? Because this is quite a lot, even from the outside.
So there are a few things, right? So let me take a step back and say that I think the way to start this off is to say, how much time can you give? And for me, I went priority set. I'm like, so I look at it as there's work, life, and self. For me, work kind of breaks into two, which is obviously day job and creator. And so my thing was, okay, priorities. There's a certain amount of time I give for work, certain amount of time I give for life, because want to spend time with family, have certain things I will not compromise on, spend time with daughter, with Pooja. So some of those things are already sorted. At that time goes away.
Right.
Which is why every choice I've made as a creator has been around how much time in a week will it take. So advertising is an example, right? IVM produces it for me. So the only time investment I do is that 1 hour or 2 hours a week I record. If I'm doing 2 episodes, I record for 2 hours, 1 hour. So I go straight up in that sense. So that's scheduled. So there are certain time periods. I give them options of about 3 time slots in a week. And so all the guests are scheduled around that basis when they're available. I'm reasonably flexible in that.
I see.
The Varun Duggi show, which is why it went from being chat based to being solo initially, was because I realized I couldn't do 2 of those. Suddenly, 4 hours a week of conversations, and coordination to find a guest to come in that slot, and the slot should work for both. And it's simpler because you're doing it remotely. But if you were going into a studio, it was a nightmare comparatively. If I think in hindsight, because I used to be in the office, I would record from like about 7 to 8 in the night at the studio in IBM. So I'd finish off work by 6. I would travel 1 hour to the studio, record for 1 hour with the guests, and then drive all the way back home. And I do that once a week. And sometimes I would so I learned very early on that banking is important. So I'll never have like, okay, I've recorded episodes every week for the next week. No, at most times I would have enough episodes for the next 2 to 3 weeks already done. So in case I can't do a week, it's sorted. The Varun Duggi show is simpler because now they're all largely solo episodes. I sit on a Sunday evening for 1 hour. I record 4 episodes, so I'm done for 2 weeks. So I spend more time collecting what the topics could be. And I put those down. So I have a couple of notebooks and some scribbles on an iPad and stuff like that. So I'll keep ideas ready. I'll let that ruminate through the week. Sunday evening, about like at 5:36, just sit down once for an hour, 6 to 7, 7:30. I just record them back to back because I don't script them. I do pointers. So I find it easier to do pointers than to do a script because I'm very bad at reading scripts.
It's also works better for podcast format. It's more of a conversation.
Yeah, it does for sure. Right. The one thing which I struggle with most times is I know sometimes I have to do ad spots and I have to read the ads because obviously they've come from brands and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm always tweaking some stuff around because I can't naturally read them out. So that's how it is. And the newsletter again was like more a Friday night ritual. It became that I enjoy doing it, sitting on a Friday, work's done, sit and write a tiny, which is why my newsletter becomes smaller over time. I realized that I was looking at how much people were reading. And I read something which I think James Clear put out, and then the Substack founder put out, which said that James Clear said, make your thing compact because people should be able to read your newsletter in 5 minutes. Because you're expecting way too much from them to have them read longer than that every week. So I said, perfect. 200 words to 300 words, I can write in an hour at max. Sometimes half an hour is enough. And then the Substack founder said, add recommendations into Substack newsletters. It does really well. People really enjoy recommendations. So I started adding recommendations, right? Anyway, I consume too much content. So I had enough stuff there. So what you eventually put out there in many ways comes down to how much time you can give it.
Right.
If I had started off saying, okay, because Varun Duggi show started off by me saying, I will do another weekly chat show. After 1 month, I was done. I'm like, I cannot do this. Right. It is going to be crazy to do. Even the other podcast I'm doing has less variables. But again, we trying to fit them in an hour. I said, okay, I have 1 more hour to give now. So let me do that because my book is done. So the time I gave to my book on a daily basis over the last close to a year is now fully done. So it's opened up. Suddenly I have time. I'm like, okay, this is the empty slot. So what do I do in this now? So that's how I structure it. I think it's important to do that. You'd rather start with something that is super easy to do in the time you have, rather than to do more than fun anymore. I mean, I still find doing all of these things fun because I'm also still doing content on Instagram. I'm doing tweets. I'm doing all that stuff because I find that fun. But the day it feels like pressure is when I take a break, which is why I constantly take breaks. Like the newsletter's been on a break. It's back now again from next week. But take a break for some time. People will come back.
Yeah, I think there's this overly put pressure that creators have to be, have to nail it every week and
consistency.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you can take a couple of weeks off.
It's like banking. So if you want to be consistent and take a break, just bank. Like, to be honest, the Varun Duggi show, I could do a month's episode sitting in one sitting. I'm just like, okay, it's fine. I'll do it once every week or so. I think eventually there are times when let's say I've gone on a holiday. I've done like 6-8 episodes over one day's recording, schedule them out and just like forgot about it, except for the video I post on Instagram to promote it. Right. So I think you, if you schedule it out, if you bank enough, you can make enough time.
I think the biggest problem with banking is it can be done relatively easier for audio. But if you are like a video creator, then, scripting and then shooting, and then if you want to add B-rolls, then that's there. So I think the process is a little bit, which is a problem that I'm clearly working through some of my problems through you. So
no, video is much tougher. That's why I find audio so liberating most times, right? I was traditionally a video creative in the sense that I did video I still do video as my day job. But I just find the fact that you're not worried about the logistics of things as much on audio as you are with video. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
But even there, I've heard of interesting banking models. Doesn't work for all forms of content. Like I remember I was talking to a couple of these guys who create a lot of reels-based content, right? And they were like, we keep shooting random stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. So once in a while I have an idea. I'm like, it's almost like I've made my own stock footage. And I've shot a bunch of stuff. So I somehow said, okay, wo shot isme kaam aayega. And they drop it in there. But again, I think it differs from kind of video is a lot more tricky to deal with.
Yeah, my process is a little bit similar, where I have a hard drive full of random B-rolls, and whatever the context is, I'll just fit that in, because you just can't shoot B-roll for every video, right? It's just not a feasible thing to do.
Yeah.
You talked about two segregations of your work life. One is a day job and the next is a creator. I want to talk a little bit of the day job first and then move towards the creator part. You've spoken multiple times about how the glitch wasn't a very well thought out plan. You guys just started it and you just want to wing it, for lack of a better term. What's fascinating to me is how can someone start off something and naturally have the ability to lead a team, because it's the founder who has to act as this pillar of strength and this beacon of light when things go wrong, when the founder themselves are a little bit doubting themselves. But you can't project that image to your team members, right? So since you all got into this without like a proper plan, and you just wanted to see how it works, how have you evolved as a leader from starting to now?
So evolving as a leader is a tricky thing, right? You just kind of learn. I think at most points, what we've always maintained is we're very straight up and honest about, like, I mean, they've been many times over the years when you've really kind of screwed up. We've called the entire office together and guys, we fucked up. We've said that. We've done meetings. There's a board which in hindsight, I don't know where it went, but I remember that my office had one of those electrical boards where some people had come and scribbled on after we did one of those talks saying you didn't fuck up. So which is valid, which is okay and fair enough. People have got what we were saying. But I think what helped both of us is, and I still say this, the education I got through music television it kind of helps me till today. The 1 year I spent at MTV and the 3 odd years I spent at Channel V, because of lack of budgets, oftentimes the youngest people get opportunities to manage the biggest properties, right? Like I was managing, and this is like, I'm talking 2007, 2008. I was one of the guys managing Channel V's biggest show without ever having managed a mid-sized show, because the guy in charge of it had quit. So suddenly you're sitting and you're shooting in Kerala, you have a crew shooting in Paris, you have a crew shooting in Bombay, and you are like, okay, I've never done this before. I said yes because I'm like, okay, I got an opportunity. And so I think for me, logistics automatically became something I figured out because I didn't have an option. And for Rohit, because how his team worked, at Channel V, which is the promos team, the ability to understand how to direct and how to manage a crew as a director came very easily.
Right.
So when we started off, it is simple. I was a producer, he was a director. We would just go out and get projects. The idea was, let's find stuff we can do that's focused on digital, but let's also do stuff which we think is fun and which will pay the bills. So we were never like, okay, we won't do this because this is not what we want to do. We would do stuff. There was stuff that will pay the bills, the stuff that focuses on what you would really want to do. Let's have fun doing both, but we also need to make sure that we're not dissing the money wala part, because we're like, we have to pay the bills, we have to get. So we've taken up anything which came our way in that sense. And that kind of evolved over time. So what also helped with that is that as we were doing that, we were also very honest with the people who had joined us. We were like, okay, we're doing this the first time as well. So we'll make mistakes. You will make mistakes. Let's learn from them. We've never said no to making mistakes. We've said, if you don't learn from a mistake, then we have a problem. Like if you keep doing the same thing again and again, you're like, oh, something's wrong here, right? You didn't learn from the last 1 or 2 times. And that's how we've learned, and we kind of went in saying, how would we want to be treated? How did our bosses treat us? And thankfully we had great bosses in Channel V and MTV. And so we did what they would do, but in our own way, and eventually we figured our own way. But I think with leadership, it's more about listening, and just figuring out what people are really doing, get a great team together. And oftentimes, I've always said this, I'm just filling up the gaps for everything that people do. You have great people, they'll do the job. There's stuff which they don't want to deal with, stuff they shouldn't deal with, and stuff where they get stuck. Those are 3 points when you kind of come in and help. Like when somebody gets stuck on a contract and one clause is not getting closed, right? That's what I kind of get into it even today. Like, okay, let's figure a way to close this clause. Or some random back-end issue has come in, or there is a shoot where a client requires a senior enough voice to kind of come in and push something through. You know that they need you, but you don't have to be there all the time, sitting on top of their heads. Never been the way either of us have worked, not the way Pooja works. And if you empower people more and more, you know for a fact that they'll do a better job than you, makes your life easier, makes their life happier because they suddenly feel like they have ownership. Everybody's happy. There was I used to say this. I don't say this enough these days. I said my job as a leader has always been to be a janitor, right? You kind of come to clean stuff up when stuff goes sideways. Because that's it. If nobody's calling you in, you need to be happy because stuff seems to be going right. But you should never think that stuff is going right yourself. You should always be paranoid about what the future might bring. Which is why not having a plan has always worked, because what we spend time doing is saying that, okay, we are at this point now, what's really going to happen 6 months down the line, a year down the line in the market? And it's not like we came up with the ideas or say, okay, now interactive videos will get done, social is going to be the next thing, or like video needs to be a core part of an agency team. We said, what's happening in the States? What's happening in the European market? Most times we get that stuff in a flow. And the gaps have lessened, of course, but there was a time when it'd be 1 year gap. Like someone would start doing something in the US in let's say about 2010, that trend would not come to India till 2011, 2012, but we would start doing it in 2011 because we saw those case studies, we saw that work, we figured out how they were doing it and tried to do it ourselves. So if you give more fodder to your teams as a leader, they do so much more because they're focusing on today, you're just focusing on tomorrow.
I completely agreed with whatever you said, but one thing that I want to touch upon is the janitor part. Fun story. I was handling my dad's business for about a year, and I got into it because I wanted to do content because they had no digital strategy. And then 2 months in, I found myself doing anything but content, right? I was doing accounting, I was doing finance, I was doing sales meetings.
Someone's going to call you and say the toilet's not working, that's your job.
Yeah. I've made tea for people. So it's fascinating that once you step into this, you kind of forget that why you got into it in the first place, and you're doing everything apart from that. So I completely related.
But that's the thing, right? And that's something I've said to many people. And I remember way back, like I would speak to a lot of people who were building creative businesses. A creative person running a business often gets frustrated because you're not doing creative anymore, you're doing everything but the creative work.
For sure.
And I don't think it's just a creative person. I think in general, as you go toward leadership, you're not hands-on anymore. So you really yearn for that, to be honest. All of us, I'm pretty sure, yearn for being more hands-on, but we know we can't be, or rather we shouldn't be. But it's a natural process. And you just start to love whatever you have at every point of time. I think it's just like a natural progression of things.
I think we've also, through our education and through our, way of thinking, we've always been taught to be very hands-on and very, accommodative of what people have asked us to do. And so the moment when you realize that you don't have to do all that, there's people doing it for you. Like, what do I do? I think that can be a very daunting.
Which is why the future focus is always good to do. Saying if there are people focusing on now, you're focusing on tomorrow, or you're finding newer things to launch. I think every year what we've sat down and said that, okay, what more services can we launch? What do we need to stop doing? Because there also will be things which you will stop doing. Like we used to do a lot of, for instance, movie campaigns in the early days. At some point we started saying it's not making business sense. Let's stop doing that, because there was a point where it was not even like it wasn't fun. After a point, it just became very not so great work to do. Secondly, also became bad budgets, with you ending up losing money. So someone is to look at that and say, okay, one second, let's stop doing that. But somebody else to turn around and say, one second, we can take this learning, which are part of it, and apply that to OTTs. They'll function differently. Right. So it's that slightly wider lens which leadership needs to take. And that's the only way. So you keep throwing stuff at people, and then that's just fuel for the fire.
Beautiful. One thing that fascinates me about this industry is the process where you research about a certain category of people and the things that you learn. So, for example, there was this crypto brand that came to the place that I work at, and they were like, "We want to create a campaign, but it's for this category of people." And we were sitting there and we were like, "This is a category that never would invest in crypto, at least for like a year or a year and a half. So this campaign makes no sense." But they were telling me that we're actually seeing signups from these category of people, the most least expected. And so that was quite eye-opening for me and quite a learning for me. So I think since you have a plethora of experience working for different brands and studying different TGs, have there been any stories where you've gotten like a little bit of a surprise or like a little bit of a wake-up call saying, I never thought this TG would function this way, and okay, this is the campaign that we need to make?
I'm trying to think of any which I think surprise is a tricky one, but I think we've had many times, at most times we underestimate how smart consumers are or what they want to enjoy. I think I maybe a slightly older example and a newer example. Way back in the day, we had done this piece for Cornetto, I remember, where and this is like time when Facebook apps were a thing, right? Where what we did was, okay, on Valentine's Day, you want to send someone a customized message. We said on this, go on to Facebook, type out anything you want. And we had about 12 musicians, right? People would be dressed up as Cupid with random musical instruments, and they would make what you wrote into a song. So if you wrote meow meow, that guy would make meow meow into a song. If you wrote an actual this thing, so we did that. We had 12 guys stationed in 12 tiny like small rooms which were studios, and we'd build an entire software to kind of add packaging onto it, deploy it, and all that stuff. We thought, okay, we'll hit like 100, 200 people and all that stuff. Day one, I think we were like about 1,000 people. Okay. And so suddenly you have 11 guys who are like dying because they're making so many songs.
Right.
And we had to kind of keep up the backend to make sure that it was getting uploaded properly, but also, and thankfully we had a backup singer. So when one of the guys got tired, that 12th guy would almost be like your substitute, right? He'd keep coming in and people would kind of switch with each other. But I think that was a great one where I think after day one, we never spent money on media because it was naturally just progressing. I think about 10,000 people songs, if I remember right, during those 5-6 days. And so for us, it's like, if you make it interesting, people will try it out. But we didn't estimate the volume because we thought only people who know how to use a Facebook app will open on their browser because it didn't work on the phone app. Will use it, but it totally like surprised us, right? Even if I look more recently, I try to think of an example more recently in that sense. But I'd say something like, even the work which you've done, trying to figure an example of surprise in that sense. Because, and this is an interesting one. And this actually, I'm giving you it's a slight segue from what you asked, but
sure.
We've done campaigns many times which do focus on, let's say, the LGBTQ love, right? But we not prominently made it that. So we did a film for Netflix sometime, couple of Valentine's days ago. It's an entire music video, but it was set with the two prime characters being gay, right? But we didn't make it a gay love story, because sometimes I feel a lot of advertising becomes that. You become caricaturized, become very, okay, that's the central piece. It's a love story. Just the characters are two guys. We did another piece where we actually had a trans model in a beauty piece, which we did. We didn't focus on the fact that the model or the person we used was trans. We just made the piece, right? It just made sense. So what I've seen is two things. One is, whoever noticed it got it. Whoever didn't took it how they had to take it. But suddenly it became a normalized conversation. And I feel that the people who question this the most are people in the industry. And to them, we spoke about it. So this is what we did, because I feel the problem is that consumers will take everything. They'll never surprise. You need to make sure that the people creating the campaigns, be it the brands or the agencies, have to almost feel, okay, this is normalized. I can actually
Right.
do this.
Right.
And don't make it sensational. It is normal. There are people of all kinds, people with orientations, different, genders. But you don't have to call it out and make it a thing. Make it normal. And I think that's the way I've always found it to be. I'd say consumers will always surprise you with saying how chill they are. The problem is in many times other factors.
Right.
And it's not just brands and agencies. I think there are more things around which don't surprise you in how they react to it. But I think the general consumer is a lot smarter, is a lot more open to thoughts and ideas than we give them credit for.
I think this normalizing part is something that I found really fascinating with Little Things. I don't know if you've watched the show.
Yeah.
There's some things that the show that didn't work for me, the show, but the fact that stuff like the guy is still figuring out and the girl has made it big and she earns more and the guy is still, on the back seat, and there was not even like an acknowledgement of it, saying, yeah, this is why the guy feels this way, this is why the girl feels this way. It was just a normal story. So I love that. That's the lens.
That's how human beings are, right?
Right.
Nobody. I think the problem is now is that we've always had this very clear. Everything is either black or white, or it's hero and villain, and we've always had this one clear. Everything is gray. Let's be honest. Most. So I think that's the most, and that's what makes it interesting. If you're telling a story, if you tell a story that's, and gray is not a negative thing. Gray is like it's normal. Like none of us are the same shade in that sense, right? So I think that's what tells great stories, is that you actually show people as people, and not as not even caricature. I think it's very we go to idealistic or caricaturish. I think those are the two angles we go towards.
You've worked, like you said, on multiple brands, but I would imagine that the creative work that you've done for brands has been a collaborative process. Like you get into a room full of creative people, you brainstorm, and what you churn out is a product that all of you have put together. As a solo creator, you started ideating your stuff, you started writing your stuff, you have multiple avenues through which you're exploring your creative side. Have there been any learnings that you've learned as a solo creator? And if you were to approach the work that you do at The Glitch with the learnings as a solo creator, is there anything different that you would do? Like, are there any insights that you've taken from here to here or here to here?
I have actually taken a ton of stuff from my creative side to work. And I keep telling the teams these from very often, is that I think the tools we sometimes use, and it's a natural process that as you get larger as an organization, as the more things you do, you tend to make things a lot more complicated to execute. There's a simplicity to how creators make content, and there are many tools in that which you could actually use. Like I was telling someone the other day, I'm like, I remember a time when I started using Canva for the first time, and I told somebody in the office from the design team saying, use Canva, and they're like, no, it's not design software, right? It naturally but I'm like, look at it now. Canva is literally like I've seen CVs where people say how you've said no Photoshop, saying I design on Canva,
right?
Which I think it's come to that, and I'm not saying I'm pro this or pro that. I'm saying it's the tools which creators use are great tools to learn from and to use to create better pieces in advertising. So it's not about what is large or small, but it's saying how can it be helpful for what you're creating. So I'd go with that. One core thing though, which I always feel like you get a team together and do something. Being a solo creator has really helped me understand there's some things you have to learn to do by yourself, which you shouldn't need anybody else to do it with. And there's some things you do as a group. Whereas earlier, a lot of the work would be, okay, let's get people together to get a piece together. Now I'm like, if you want to brainstorm, think of your ideas yourself. Let's then meet with the ideas you have. So I think some of those things have kind of changed in my mind. But more than anything else, I just go with with tools and just methods. And even like how to look at data. I think that while we've always believed in creators looking at data, I feel that being a creator makes you look at data in a whole different light. Like you learn things which is unbelievable. And I'm like, why is this not taught in ad school? Like that's what you need to know. You need to know how to you learn how to A/B test by being a creator. Let's be honest. Like the best way to learn A/B testing is to be a creator and keep putting stuff out there, seeing what worked, what didn't work. And that's what I kind of go back to. Almost like I actually do this. I've done one workshop, I think multiple versions of it, at least 3 to 4 times for brands, where I'm like, this is what I learned from creators while just talking to them and creating content. And I just I update it because the more and more I talk, I have more things to add to that. And I found that brands find it fascinating because they're like, okay, how are people doing this? I'm like, they're not, don't go to saying creators shooting on an iPhone. I'm like, they are shooting on iPhone if that's all they have access to.
Right.
But go away from that and look at how they create content, how they tell stories, how they're consistent, how they plan. Just like everything from your digital tools to physical tools they kind of use to do this. And that's what I kind of focus on.
Right. For me, it's been two massive learnings being a solo creator. It's been just even though, irrespective of what work you do at your day job, just create something on the side, because you learn things about yourself that you didn't know. Because, for example, I've tried to do comedy, I've also tried to do feel good, I've also tried to do educational content. So by exploring these sides of content that I try to put out, I've discovered what is more authentic to me and what feels, who am I as a person in a way. And the second thing is, I've become far less judgmental, because when TikTok was on the rise, I looked at TikTok with a certain lens of criticism. But once I started doing this, and I started realizing, okay, so there is genuine effort that goes into everything that people try to put out. So stop being, judgmental. Yeah. You faced this problem before as a creator, so don't be judgmental at all. Yeah. This data part was a question that I wanted to ask. I think creative people inherently were like, oh, data, no, max, no, not for me. And there's this famous quote by Peter Thiel, and he's like, engineers are people who just don't get distribution. So there's this clear segregation between data and creative. And I think you've spoken at being the intersection of both these things. So for the podcast, for your newsletter, how would you track your data, and what are some of the decisions that you've taken from it?
So I'll tell you what, I think with data, the problem is that we look at it as, okay, it's a sea of numbers, right? But nowadays, the good part is most dashboards are a lot more friendly for you to understand, but it's helping you understand how people react to it. I'll give you a podcast is a great example, right? If you look at what your retention rate is, it shows you how long people have stuck on to listen to each of your episodes. So, okay, 100% people clicked on, after 2 minutes 50 seconds, 20% dropped off.
Right.
So you go to 2 minutes 50 seconds and say, what did I say there that maybe made people drop off? So you see those trends, and sometimes you can rejig small things. Like my intros used to be very long. I compressed my intros down because I realized that most people would drop off about 2 odd minutes into my intro and not stay for the entire conversation. So my intros now never go beyond a minute. Like my generally stick to a minute at max. And that retention kind of helped. So you look at some of those, you look at, okay, maybe me not switching topics is kind of making it this way. Then I even look at stuff like what even like something like Instagram content or even newsletter, right? Newsletter, I kind of see what have people clicked on. So when I put recommendations, I see what people clicked on. I check what kind of titles. So as much as newsletters are written, I think we live in a world today where the headline matters as much for people to read something or consume something, right? It's the most clickbaity thing to say, but it's true. So there are keywords if you use in the first 3-4 words of your podcast title, your newsletter title, YouTube video title, any of those which get you more people to kind of start consuming it.
Right.
Then it's up to your content. So it's some of those things I've tracked. I'm saying, and I keep trying stuff out. I keep trying different words, different ways of writing the name of writing the title of a podcast episode even. And that's how you should look at it. You look at saying, okay, what trends can you spot? Isn't it how people used to say that a creative person is walking out, taking that in that classical example of someone walking on this, taking a walk to come up with an idea. Same thing, you're trying to get some insight.
Right.
I'm saying you get the same kind of insight by looking at a screen of data.
Right.
Because I've gotten so much like from that, that oftentimes really helps. And I'm just trying to think of something, even like something like Instagram, right? I'm fascinated by, because I do put up reels now more often than I ever did. What gets numbers? Now, So weirdly enough, my videos with my daughter get the most views. I call her, I tell her she's my biggest clickbait, but I'm like, I don't want to overuse that clickbait, right? Her videos come up only when she wants to make a video. None of those are my choices.
Right.
Like I have one more she made me shoot 2 days ago, which I haven't put up yet, but it's like her saying, no, I want to shoot this. She's very specific. For a 4-year-old, she's very specific about what reels she wants to make. So she's the highest clickbait, right? People like those numbers are insane.
And you learn that through data.
Then weirdly, not even workouts. Some of the simplest things, and this is something. So I read about it, saying stuff which people feel they can also do gets more numbers, and then comes informative or like workout, etc. Which is, I mean, I'm still trying to map it. It's still not an exact science, but I think the interesting part with how these algos work, be it how TikTok used to work in India at least, how Reels work, YouTube Shorts again is I still don't get the algo. I've been trying to understand YouTube Shorts as an algo, because everything is TikTok now, right? Let's be honest, everything is TikTok now. I subscribe to Masterclass, some of their courses, and they have a section which is like a reel, where they've taken clips from the courses, and you can just keep scrolling through them like this, and you're just watching them. So everyone's taken that model of content because they've realized people want to just kind of flip through. Pinterest has it. I saw it on Pinterest the other day. I'm like, Pinterest has something called, I think it's called Capture or something like that, which is again another feed. So I feel that at the simplest point, it's just a narrative style.
Are you a fan of the format though? Like I for the love of God cannot do short form because I feel it's quite underwhelming and there's no depth to it. But that's just my opinion. So
here's what and interestingly, I remember speaking to this one guy called Jacob Pace sometime early last year on the podcast, right? And Jacob had kind of hit me up online. We just happened to connect, and I should check what he's up to these days. Was running a company called Flighthouse, and he was 21 years old. He was a CEO of a company called Flighthouse out of LA. And they were they had the largest TikTok following for a non-individual at that point of time. And he was doing formatted shows on TikTok where he was basically saying, okay, guess the TikTok lyric. A song would play, two people are sitting, they're trying to guess what the song is, or what the next line is. They're basically doing very like game show-ish games, but in that 60-second, 30-second piece. And he said that you will start off with UGC, but eventually people will find a way to do formatted shows in that 60-second period,
right.
And use the tools of what this can give. So I feel at some point we'll find better. I'm seeing more and more informative pieces coming up now. One of my favorite pieces is the micro vlog. Like doing a vlog on a reel is so interesting because you're just trying to find a way to compress a vlog into 60 seconds, right? Okay. So I think there are ways to use it which maybe we haven't found yet. Not everything is just going to be singing and dancing and repeating what everyone's doing is what I believe.
Right.
It will still be the most popular format, but I don't think it will be the only format. Like I've done reels on just picking up a book and talking about something I highlighted on it, and that's done well.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, there is hope. Like there is hope for other kinds of content as well. So so I don't know if I'm a fan of it. I like to have the option. I still consume way too much YouTube. So YouTube is still primary in terms of just video consumption for me. But I find this to be the best video part of Instagram. I've never was an IGTV. IGTV doesn't exist anymore. So I never was an Instagram video consumer, but this has made me consume more video on Instagram.
Right. About the YouTube
because the platform got it
right. See, we talked about trends and we talked about, harping on the trend wave as we call it in our industry. What I find very interesting about what you're doing is it's timeless. Like even if it's 10 years from now, if I listen to it, it would still apply to my life. And I feel like there are going to be, once the dust settles and once, people have consumed all the trends, there are going to be instances where people come back to content where they learn about themselves and they find out ways in which they can get better, and eventually that is never going to die and it's always going to be timeless. Is that the lens through which you make your content decisions on selecting topics, expanding on them and putting it out there? Is that the lens that you use?
So that's actually that's the exact lens I look at the Varun Duggi show, right? That's actually, so all my solo episodes are that. I'm like, okay, I'm consuming something and I'm like, someone might find this interesting because I learned something from consuming this, right? And in most cases, it is referenced from somewhere, and
Sure.
it's an exact reference. I call that out. My idea is that because a bite-sized one, the good part about bite-sized, and weirdly enough, go back to my learning from television, right? In television, we were always told that when you're making short-form content, focus on something that can be consumed at any point of time, anywhere, anyhow. You don't expect someone to just get a bite-sized piece and watch it just in the morning as a morning show. A morning show, again, like a longer, we were still working in program times. So I took that, to be honest, because I remember when I first started the Varun Duki show, I had separate kinds of episodes on Mondays and separate on Fridays, right? I very quickly realized that was stupid of me because people were consuming anything anytime. So I stopped making Mondays different from Fridays. Now they're all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And the idea is that if you have content that people can consume at any point of time, which is also kind of helps you, because what I can very easily do, I'm about 62 episodes in now. I can turn around tomorrow and say, okay, 1 second, let me do 2 weeks of just throwbacks. Let me pick 4 episodes from the past, which from very early on, which might still be relevant now, just put them back here. I'm sure they at least like a bunch of people who've not heard that because it's too early back in that. So I think that gives you an opportunity to do a few things. You can repurpose them, you can put them back there. And like you said, it's timeless because it's just something that should always be relevant. And even for advertising is dead. I think my lens has always been trying to figure out, and I said this earlier, that I didn't have anything which I could learn from to understand what the media industry had when I wanted to work in it. My point is, if I'm someone who's kind of getting out of college, who's just at the start of their career, what would I want to know about where things are kind of going? And from time to time, I sit down and say, okay, what has changed? Like, I really want to get someone now on your on-ground activation event space, because I know I had Roshan a while back. Should actually get him back. And obviously that world has fully changed. So that old episode in many ways might not be relevant anymore.
Right.
Okay. Now, so I think it's always important to look at that, saying what can you make, what can you do to make it more relevant for tomorrow as well. But that's my lens is generally this. Like, I learned from this. There's this Ryan Holiday piece, right? Ryan Holiday introduced me to Stoicism, one of my favorite creators. I've read all his tons of books. So basically, Ryan Holiday is like a modern day philosopher, if you want to call him. He's written a bunch of books on Stoicism, got introduced to it, I would say about a year, 2019-ish. Helped me through lockdown, which can give me a perspective on life. But one of the things he says is that reading a book is like having a conversation with someone from history, right? And so if you have the greatest minds of the past, reading their books is like having a conversation with them. And so in many ways, content should also be like that. Like, you just kind of, even if it's a throwback, even if it's older, most of it will continue to be relevant. The technologies might change, the platforms will change, some of those things will change, but the essence of a lot of these things won't change.
That was my follow-up question. Technology changing and relevance, right? Because let's face it, like, most of the distribution isn't in our control, and we don't like something like Facebook was so big as little as 5 years ago, and today we don't know where it is, right? So 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, where do you see creators going from a distribution standpoint? Do you still think we're going to be dependent on a third party for distribution, or is it going to be in our hands? So where do you see the creator economy going?
So I think the whole TikTok thing which happened in India, kind of made all creators look at what they do very differently. I think that was a big point for us, because there were creators who were only doing content on TikTok.
Yes.
Suddenly they had no platform.
Yes.
They had to kind of start off on Instagram, go to Moj, go to Takatak, go to all that. And over the last 2 years, I've seen this major shift in conversation where creators are no longer talking about how much money they make from brands. They'll all talk about it, but they're not talking about it as much. Creators want to start businesses. They want to build courses. They want to do digital products, physical products, because at the end of the day, as a creator, you have one thing, which is that you have distribution in terms of you're like a media network. You have an audience, whichever size that is, will consume your content, which means you have a direct link to them. You have their email IDs, you have them coming onto your channel. So you don't have to be everywhere, but you have to be in a few places to make sure you have that captive. I feel as we go ahead, you're going to have more and more people building communities in I know everyone says Discord, but I still find Discord to be a little more complex for most people to get around. That Facebook still survives, by the way, on Facebook groups. It's still the biggest way to build a community globally, which I find interesting. Is that even though we none of us go on Facebook, but Facebook groups are still the biggest thing ever, right? I'm part of one, which only talks about really random old trashy Hindi movies.
I'm part of one
only
where I
group.
use for my house hunting, flatmate scouting. So that's the only purpose Facebook
Yes.
is.
But I think we're going to that. We're going back to that smaller groups of people consuming content, like what the guys at Avalon are doing with Spaces, with Scenes, sorry, and so on and so forth. So I think it's interesting that we move towards that, but creators will start thinking like entrepreneurs. So you're going to say, what products am I selling? That's how I make money. Because till now the worry was that if I only let a third party direct it, like imagine a photography creator on Instagram today feels very cheated right now because everything is video now. It's not the platform's fault either. People want more video. Let's be honest. They wouldn't change it if more people were consuming photographic content. They're doing it because people want more of this.
It's just the industry evolving.
Exactly right. So you got to think about what you're building to sustain, and it can't just be brand and ad led. I think that ship has sailed. It'll be a core part of how you'll make money. It is no longer the only way to make money.
Sure.
Which is also going to change how brands deal with creators.
Right.
I think till now brands in many ways always had the upper hand, right? Today, I'm sure there'll come a time when for a creator, a brand piece is great to have. It's not the only way they're going to make money. And you're seeing that with larger talent, like celebrities. Everyone's either investing, starting companies, building products, because now the ability to build a product, put it out there, be digital or physical, is much simpler.
Right.
And I think that's where it'll go. It'll go to say that let me build communities. Makes it easier to not want to have a million followers, right? You think I have a community of 100 people. These 100 people pay for something which I give them. And that's pretty much it.
I also feel like we're moving into a time where creators and brands are not going to have one-off relations like this is the product.
Yeah, for sure.
Just do one piece or two pieces and do some sustenance around it, and just we'll see the next time. I think it's going to be more of a extended period of time, whether in terms of financial, monetary benefits or equity. Or we see it happening with names like Virat Kohli with 1X, Deepika Padukone with Adidas, but I think that model is going to sort of trickle down and impact every creator. Talking about distribution, this is something that we this is something that we hear on a daily basis in our day jobs. In that make it viral, that is a common thing that we hear, and I'm kind of interested in knowing your definition of virality, because to me, more impact is more than reach for me. And so for me, in that sense, if you ask me what virality is, I would say it's impact over reach. But virality is very subjective, right? It can mean reach, it can mean impact, it can mean targeting a specific set of audiences. So I'm kind of interested in knowing what your definition of virality is.
I think the problem with the word viral is that we never have that. You need to have an asterisk with that. What is that sad? What is that?
For sure.
Conditions. Because what do you want to be like? I know a lot of people in the advertising industry who hate the cred campaigns. Let's be honest. Like cred campaigns, most viral ad campaigns in the long time. We all had to admit, like, I'm a huge fan of that of the work they've done. But a lot of people diss on it because they go, what's the point? Brand kahan hai? You hear all those standard terms. My point is, I don't think cred got into it to say, I want to push for more downloads. I think the requirement was, let's push as much. How many people in the country now know cred? I think a majority of people in the country know there is something called cred, know it's a credit card payment. They know a few things. It's been drilled into their heads. Like most of us can say what says at the start of those ads because you've seen it so many times, in many ways. So,
which I think was strategically designed, to have the same comfort.
If you think about that, bumper is always in the end. You had him talk about the product in the beginning because everyone's waiting for the payoff in the end, which is exactly how you make a reel.
Right.
A reel starts off with the bumper and the payoff is always at the end, right? It's literally, it's the same format. But I think in my head, and I'm thinking about, because I don't know what their internal KPIs were or what they wanted to kind of achieve. But in my head, if that is what they want to achieve, they've hit it. But if what they want to achieve was to hit downloads, maybe not. Because it still doesn't really push you to download, it pushes you to get excited about a campaign. So to kind of put your filter of saying what do I want to get out of it. A while back we had done this piece for Netflix, which was when they were launching their mobile only plan.
Okay.
Their mobile only plan, where obviously it was cheaper, only worked on mobile phones, didn't work on desktop, TV app, etc. We approached that campaign very differently from how we would approach a standard Netflix campaign when we worked on it, because we said once here you need to push for someone to download it to get to take the subscription. So it's a lot more on what you're getting out of it.
Right.
But yet also find elements that make it viral in that sense. But before that, it was always like we pushing out saying that this is a show that's coming out. You want something about that show to go viral. So think about what you want out of it. I think most times we start off by saying we want it to go viral. We never really put on what we want out of it. So there's this campaign from a while back. I think the Australian, was the Cancer Association, one of those saying 100 Ways to Die or 1,000 Ways to Die. There was this cute animated film.
Yeah.
1,000 Ways to Die, right?
Yeah.
The interesting part is that was done to show how, if you don't get road safety right, so many deaths happen. Campaign went viral. The number of deaths didn't go down; they went higher. Right. So it didn't really work. And that's actually an interesting case. So oftentimes you need to say, what do you want to get out of it? Is what you're doing, it might be the best creative ever, but is it getting the effect you want at the end of it? And I think that's true virality. It's out there, but also gets the results.
Just the last couple of questions for me. Varun, we've always been, as Indians, we've always, even on TVs and, movies, we've always, we're the people who are doing the taxes of other people, or, we're fixing people's teeth, or, we've never been this poster country for creatives and creative work. And the amount of creative work that I'm seeing personally, once I've gotten into this industry, has been immense. And I really feel that we should have gone global at this point, but I think there are some things that need to be fixed and are holding us back. While the top tier talent has already gone global thanks to Netflix and Amazon. From a YouTube space or from a social space, I think there's still some work to do. But why do you think that is? Why do you think we've not had the Ali Abdals and the Matt D'Avelas of the world?
So here's the way I look at it. Right? I feel India to itself is a world, right? Sure. So if you want to be a massive creator in India, a lot of your content might not be relevant to anybody else in the world. I think that's the problem, right? Ali Abdal, Matt D'Avella, two people I genuinely love their content. Matt D'Avella a lot more because I love his story. I love his documentaries. I think they're fabulous documentaries. Same. I'll never be a minimalist in life, but I will consume all that content. But I think the thing is, it's language. So if you're an English-based creator in India, you will only hit a certain scale. You need to either do Hindi, do regional, and for no other reason than the fact that those are the languages that are predominantly spoken, right? For a wider audience. Which is why a lot of the wider audience also watches a lot more humor of a certain kind, which I don't relate to, but I know a large part of the masses do. And I remember very early on when, if you went on YouTube's top 10, whatever, I don't know, the trending list, you'd see a lot of your standard stand-up comedians, right? You'd see all their videos there. Now, if you go there, you won't recognize 99% of the videos there. And I remember talking to one of the English stand-ups, and he said, dude, I can't change what I do, but the audience doesn't want English humor. But I'm just focusing on going deeper with the ones who are doing that, or maybe try Hindi in that sense. I think that's the trick, is that if you want to be truly global, I don't know if you can do that with language-based content. You might be able to do it like, how can I forget his name? Who's the creator who only does expressions? Not the Indian one, the one guy who just
African.
He doesn't speak, right? I think that's the trick. Is that because his content has no language, it's universal.
Right.
Once you have local culture and nuances in there, it becomes a lot trickier. But I feel that what might actually blow it globally might tomorrow be let's say a lifestyle influencer, could be a creator focused on, self-help. It's tricky because I've realized that a lot of self-help, especially in India, goes very spiritual in a religious sense, which does well. which isn't necessarily global, because again, it's tricky, right? So I think the idea is, say, how can I get a captive audience and kind of grow with that, but to be globally relevant as that, I mean, even sound like a Prajakta today, right? Obviously, massive creator, globally known. Her content is still very Indian in essence, because it has to be. What will make her relevant to everybody else? I don't know. Yeah, so I mean, there's a plus and a minus, right? You can either play on the border and say that I want to only focus on the Indian content, on the Indian audience, do that. Or you say, I want to be global, I want to take that punt, but then you need to figure out how to build that narrative, build scale. So like for instance, advertising is dead for me can honestly be much more global if I get more international guests. I purposely don't get as many because I feel some of those pieces might not be relevant to the audience here. So I don't get them, but I do occasionally get, let's say, a global CEO or get someone from a startup abroad and stuff like that. So I think it's that at some point there is balance to that. I think the business creator might actually have that opportunity a lot more than I would say more entertainment focused creators. But we also are in an extremely westernized world, let's be honest. And I don't think that disadvantage is, I don't think it's a disadvantage. I just think it's the way it is. It's like we need to have our K-pop moment at some point, or K-dramas moment in that sense. And I think that's the only way it can kind of scale.
I think it's coming. I think I am very optimistic, and I think we'll get there. Varun, one last
I live in a house filled with people who watch only K content, so I'm pretty sure. Yeah, everything from the music to the shows happen in my house. I'm not a huge consumer of either, but I can see that it works.
Right. Varun, I know we're running out of time, but I do have one last question. What is your message to aspiring creators?
I'd say that there's almost like a couple of pillars you need to focus on. If you're a creator today, number one is you got to create content that you love to create. If you're only trying to focus on what people want, you aren't going to be able to do it in the long term. So focus on what you really love to create, but never forget your audience lens and platform lens. I think audience, platform, and self, but self always comes first because that's what will keep you going for it in the long term. But understand platforms, understand data, understand what people are consuming, understand why they're consuming it. Like I try to talk to people who consume my content saying, what did you like about it? And trying to get some feedback there. So look at from that lens. Platforms will come and go, things will change in that sense, but the essence of your content will continue to stay relevant because you can easily take a podcast from one platform to another. You can take a newsletter and make it a carousel. You can take the same carousel and make it into a Twitter thread. You will find a way to adapt your content to the platform, but if the essence of what you're putting down is kind of lost, if you forget your purpose, then it's going to get tricky. So just focus on that.
I think that's a great way to end this. Varun, thank you so much for doing this. This is going to be one of my highlights of my creator journey, and I will look back and I'm pretty sure I'll take a lot of learnings from this myself. And I just want to thank you for the time, and please keep doing what you're doing. I don't know if you don't know it or not, it is impacting. I can't speak for others, but I can speak for myself. It has brought me a lot of value genuinely. So thank you.
So happy to know that. Thanks. Thanks for the chat. And I always enjoy conversations where I can kind of think about certain things. I need to go back to my why. I have to go check that once again. I do that every 6 months. You've reminded me I haven't done that in 6 months. So I'm going to go ahead and do that.
If there's anything, I was happy to help. Thank you, Varun. Thank you.